Good evening, I'm Amna Nawaz.
And I'm Jeff Bennett. On the NewsHour tonight, the potential impact of President Trump's reported plan to take control of the U.S. Postal Service.
A fired park ranger weighs in on the major impacts of the president's cuts to government services.
All these large-scale terminations definitely will have a direct safety impact on national parks around the country.
And a preview of national elections in Germany on Sunday, where immigration has been the key issue.
Major funding for the PBS NewsHour has been provided by friends of the NewsHour, including Jim and Nancy Bildner, and the Robert and Virginia Schiller Foundation. The Judy and Peter Bloom Kovler Foundation, upholding freedom by strengthening democracies at home and abroad.
Cunard is a proud supporter of public television. On a voyage with Cunard, the world awaits. A world of flavor, diverse destinations, and immersive experiences. A world of leisure and British style. All with Cunard's White Star service.
The John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, fostering informed and engaged communities. More at kf.org.
And with the ongoing support of these individuals and institutions. And friends of the NewsHour. This program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
Welcome to the NewsHour. President Trump levied new shots against Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky today.
First, he told a radio interviewer that he didn't think it's very important that Zelensky attend meetings aimed at bringing the war to an end. Then President Trump stepped up his criticism while speaking to a group of governors gathered at the White House.
I've had very good talks with Putin, and I've had not such good talks with Ukraine. They don't have any cards, but they play it tough. But we're not going to let this continue. This war is terrible.
These latest comments follow a week of escalating tensions between Trump and Zelensky, which has seen the president refer to Zelensky as a dictator and falsely claim that Ukraine started the war. A federal judge in Manhattan adjourned the corruption case against New York City Mayor Eric Adams today. But Judge Dale Ho left the charges against him in place for now. The judge also appointed an outside lawyer, Paul Clement, to present independent arguments on the DOJ's motion to drop the case. He was Solicitor General under former President George W. Bush. The push to dismiss Adams' case led to a wave of resignations by federal prosecutors. This week, New York Governor Kathy Hochul said she would not use her legal authority to remove him from office for now. Also in New York, Luigi Mangione, the man accused of killing United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson, appeared in court today for the first time since his arraignment on state murder and terror charges 2 months ago. His attorney said there were search and seizure issues during Mangione's arrest. Outside the courthouse, she said a number of factors are complicating his right to a fair trial.
He is being publicly treated as guilty and as having the presumption of guilt as opposed to the presumption of innocence, which is what he is entitled to.
Mangione has pleaded not guilty to the charges. He faces a separate federal case that could carry the death penalty. A jury in western New York found Hadi Matar, the man who stabbed author Salman Rushdie, guilty of attempted murder today. The 27-year-old from New Jersey gave no obvious reaction as he heard the verdict this afternoon. Jurors deliberated for less than 2 hours. In 2022, Matar ran onto a stage where Rushdie was speaking and stabbed him more than a dozen times, leaving him blind in one eye. The 77-year-old award-winning novelist served as the key witness in the trial. Matar faces up to 25 years in prison. Sentencing is set for April. The mayor of Los Angeles, Karen Bass, dismissed the city's fire chief today over her handling of last month's deadly wildfires. In a statement, Bass said she's removing Chief Kristen Crowley effective immediately, adding that 1,000 firefighters that could have been on duty on the morning of the fires broke out were instead sent home on Chief Crowley's watch. The Palisades fire erupted in early January and went on to destroy or damage 8,000 homes and other structures. At least 12 people were killed. In the Middle East, Hamas says it released another body to Israeli officials today after confusion over yesterday's transfer of hostage remains led to concerns about the fragile ceasefire. Forensic evidence found that one of the 4 bodies transferred yesterday was not that of Shiri Bibas, as had been promised. Her remains were due to be returned, along with those of her 2 young sons. Hamas claims they were all killed during an Israeli airstrike alongside Palestinians. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said today that Hamas is to blame for their deaths.
Who kidnaps a little boy and a baby and murders them? Monsters, that's who. I vow that I will not rest until the savages who executed our hostages are brought to justice.
Meantime, both sides say the release of 6 living hostages ranging from 22 to 40 years old will proceed tomorrow as planned. They're expected to be exchanged for hundreds of Palestinian prisoners. Israel also said today that it's surging troops to the Israeli-occupied West Bank after 3 empty buses exploded near Tel Aviv yesterday in an apparent attempted terrorist attack. No injuries were reported. Doctors in Rome say Pope Francis is not out of danger, but that his medical condition is not life-threatening. That assessment came in their first in-person update since the 88-year-old pontiff was admitted to the hospital a week ago with bronchitis. The Pope's continued stay has raised questions about whether he would resign. Doctors say Pope Francis will remain hospitalized at least through next week. On Wall Street today, markets plunged to end the week amid worries over a slowing economy. The Dow Jones Industrial Average sank nearly 750 points for its worst fall of the year. The Nasdaq dropped more than 400 points. The S&P 500 also ended sharply lower on the day. And they say revenge is a dish best served cold. Last night, though, it was served on ice. Canada beat the U.S. 3-2 in an overtime thriller to win the inaugural 4 Nations Face-Off hockey tournament. The victory comes as relations between the 2 countries remains frosty amid Donald Trump's tariff plan and comments about making Canada the 51st state. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau after the game wrote, "You can't take our country and you can't take our game." Team USA has not beaten Canada in an international final or championship series since 1996. And the New York Yankees are ditching a nearly 5-decade rule on facial hair. Owner Hal Steinbrenner announced today that players can now sport beards so long as they are, quote, well-groomed. Steinbrenner is the son of the late George Steinbrenner, who banned long hair and beards back in 1976, though mustaches were still okay. The younger Steinbrenner today admitted that the policy for today's generation is outdated, adding that he'd hate to lose out on good players because they didn't want to play under such restrictions. Still to come on the NewsHour, a fired park ranger weighs in on the president's cuts to government services. David Brooks and Jonathan Capehart discuss the week's political headlines. And a D.C. exhibit showcases the history, struggles, and triumphs of black travel in the U.S.
This is the PBS NewsHour from the David M. Rubenstein Studio at WETA in Washington and in the West from the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism at Arizona State University.
President Trump reportedly plans to fire the governing board of the U.S. Postal Service and place the independent agency under the control of the Commerce Department, a move that could be the first step in privatizing a service established 250 years ago. The White House initially denied that an executive order to make that change is in the works, but late today, President Trump admitted that he's considering it. Jacob Bogage broke the story for the Washington Post, and he joins us now. Thanks for being with us.
Hey, great to hear from you, Jeff. Thanks for having me.
So what are your sources telling you about what the administration is planning and what it could ultimately mean for the U.S. Postal Service?
Well, step one here would be to place the Postal Service, take it out of independent status and embed it inside the Commerce Department. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick was just sworn in today, and we've reported over the course of months that he's been engaging with then President-elect and now President Trump about privatizing this agency. So taking it out of that independent status would be step one. And step two would be leadership changes. Postmaster General Louis DeJoy announced he plans to retire soon, and the Board of Governors can be fired for cause by the president. That could be another step.
Well, this will certainly lead to legal challenges. What have experts been telling you about the authority the president would have to dissolve the Postal Service leadership and then effectively move it to the Commerce Department?
So the Postal Service has to have a board of governors. These are bipartisan individuals appointed by the president, confirmed by the Senate, and then they together select or can remove the Postmaster General. There are powers that the Postal Service has on things like service, on things like rates and prices, on major investments that can only be made by the governors. So you have to have a board in place. And that's kind of what's complicating this for the White House a little bit. How do you take these individuals who can only be removed for cause from an agency that by law is independent? You can't legally move it into the Commerce Department. How do you bring that under the control of the White House? That's a legally dubious question.
Well, President Trump, as you well know, he's long mused about privatizing the Postal Service. And as you mentioned, the Commerce Secretary was sworn in today. And here's what the president had to say about USPS during that ceremony.
Well, we want to have a post office that works well and doesn't lose massive amounts of money. And we're thinking about doing that, and it'll be a form of a merger, but it'll remain the Postal Service, and I think it'll operate a lot better than it has been over the years. It's been just a tremendous loser for this country. Tremendous amounts of money are being lost.
It's undeniable that the Postal Service has been losing money. It had a lot to do with the way its pensions were organized. It's lost more than $9 billion in the most recent fiscal year. Does that strengthen the case for privatization?
That's a difficult question because it's an ideological question. So let's look at this from the big picture. The United States has had a postal service longer than we've been a country. It was founded in 1775. Obviously, the country was founded in 1776. Until 1970, the Postal Service didn't have a profit motive. Its motive was to serve people all across the country with equal and reliable service. We changed that in 1970 it's a long story we don't need to get into right now, but we changed that to be more of like a crown corporation or a government-sponsored corporation. So what do we lose without an independent postal service? Well, this is an agency that belongs to all of us. It doesn't belong to the White House. Because it's independent, it has an obligation to serve all of us equally, reach everybody's address with the same service and the same pricing. A privatized postal service, or one in which mail delivery becomes political, will not have those same motivations.
To your point, in many cases in parts of the country, it's the only mail carrier, the only mail service. And e-commerce giants like Amazon rely on the Postal Service for those last mile deliveries. So how could that affect the mail and packages that Americans get?
This is a story that is obviously not going away. And Jeff, you and I know that really well from having covered it for so long. So there's a term that folks should get to know right now, and that's coopetition. Cooperation and competition. Private express carriers like Amazon, FedEx, UPS use the Postal Service to carry their least profitable packages. The Postal Service has to go to everyone's address 6, sometimes 7 days a week. They've got to go over the hill and around the bend, even if it doesn't make money. Amazon, FedEx, UPS don't have to do that. So they give these packages to the Postal Service. They're competitors, but they leverage each other for business. That is extremely, extremely profitable for the Postal Service. They can't survive without that coopetition.
And final question, Jacob. You mentioned the Postmaster General, Louis DeJoy, is stepping down. He's halfway into his 10-year term. Based on your reporting, do you know why he's stepping down now?
Not precisely. I mean, we look at the last fiscal quarter. It's the first time the Postal Service has been in the black, except for some like mandatory pension and healthcare costs since the height of the COVID crisis. It's a big win for his 10-year plan. A lot of this, the stuff that he has in the works has been, moving rather successfully. A bumpy rollout, but it's been rolling out nonetheless and being implemented. Louis DeJoy, and I've spoken to him numerous times. He's a really successful businessman. He's in his late 60s. He has adult children. He's retired from businesses that he ran or helped lead multiple times, and running the Postal Service, believe it or not, was a retirement gig for him. He's 5 years into this job, and that's about the time frame he promised when he took it. Is there more to this story about why he's stepping down? I would be willing to bet on that, and that's something that I'll keep reporting on. But I also know that this is around the time frame that he was looking to leave anyway.
Jacob Ogage of the Washington Post, thanks for being with us.
Thanks, Jeff.
At the direction of President Trump, Elon Musk and his team are firing workers across the federal government at a breakneck pace. This week, some 6,000 employees are expecting termination notices at the IRS, along with more than 5,000 across the Department of Health and Human Services. Already, more than 200 have been fired from FEMA, around 400 from the Federal Aviation Administration, and more than 1,000 from the Department of Veterans Affairs. Our White House correspondent Laura Barón-López spoke with one former federal worker who was among those recently let go.
The Trump administration has fired more than 20,000 federal workers and contractors. The effort to dramatically cut the federal workforce, led by Elon Musk's team, has been chaotic and sweeping, and in some instances, the administration has scrambled to reverse the firings. The terminations are ongoing, and they include 1,000 National Parks employees. Employees like former park ranger Lydia Jones, who worked at Badlands National Park in South Dakota. She joins me now. Lydia, thank you so much for talking to us. You were fired on Valentine's Day. What went through your mind when you got the news?
And I was heartbroken when I initially got the news. It was definitely unexpected. It was something that I was planning on potentially making a lifelong career, so it was quite the surprise.
And you were one of 3 EMTs at your park at Badlands National Park, which stretches over 244,000 acres. You welcome more than 1 million visitors a year. What did your job require, and why did you become an EMT?
My official main job was as an interpretive park ranger. A lot of my duties were related to visitor services, working in the visitor center, providing visitors with information and directions, doing educational programs, guided hikes, things like that. But I was also one of the 3 EMTs in the park and was a member of our search and rescue team and responded to emergencies throughout the park. And that was something that I chose kind of on my own to pursue, because being in such a rural area with a lack of first responders and an increase in visitation, an increase in incidents, I thought that there was a need for more EMTs in the park.
Do you think that your firing could make the park less safe?
All these large-scale terminations definitely will have a direct safety impact on national parks around the country, including Badlands National Park. We're talking about very rural areas that are typically very far away from major hospitals or trauma centers. And a lot of times the park staff there are going to be the first people to be on scene to provide sometimes life-saving care to these patients and these visitors. So I absolutely think that this will have an impact, yes.
Lydia, you've talked about some of the sacrifices that you have to make to become a park ranger. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
When you first start out, you have to work as what's called a seasonal employee. I generally worked in Badlands National Park every summer season for 6 months, and then I would apply and I went to 2 other national parks during the winter seasons. So you're kind of constantly moving around. You're typically away from family, friends, loved ones, and it can be quite hard, but a lot of people, including myself, are willing to make those sacrifices with the hopes of getting a permanent position. and mostly because we truly care about our jobs and truly believe in providing that service to the American people.
Do you plan on joining any of the lawsuits in the hopes of getting your job back? And if not, what's next for you?
I'm still kind of debating, how to proceed with all of that. I would absolutely love to go back to my job. I would go back in a heartbeat if I had the opportunity to. But, if not, I will pursue other options. I do plan on joining the local volunteer fire department at this time, so I can still provide service as an EMT to the local area and community. Even though I may not be in the Park Service anymore for right now, I still believe in service, and I still want to make that a part of my life.
Lydia Jones, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
In the German capital of Berlin today, a man was critically wounded in a knife attack at the city's Holocaust Memorial. And the suspected attacker was arrested hours later near the scene with blood on his hands. All this just 2 days before voters go to the polls in an election dominated by concerns about immigration. The country is expected to reject the incumbent left-leaning Chancellor Olaf Scholz in favor of a center-right candidate followed closely by an anti-immigration party that has the backing of the Trump administration. Special correspondent Malcolm Brabant reports now from Germany.
Magdeburg in former East Germany. 2 months have passed since the terror attack by a Saudi Arabian doctor who drove his car into a packed Christmas market, killing a 9-year-old boy, 5 women, and injuring 300. The tributes have diminished, but not the grief of Elke Pesch.
Ich kann weinen, ich bin so traurig.
I am so sad. This should never have happened. Absolutely not. Never. For anyone.
Niemals. Für niemanden.
There have since been 2 more Islamist attacks in southern Germany that have claimed 4 lives and driven Magdeburg street food vendor Diana Daum to despair.
One attack after another happens. How far does it have to go?
The attacks have galvanized support for the anti-immigrant AfD, the Alternative for Germany party.
Jetzt ist Zeit für unsere Sicherheit.
Now is the time for our security, says leader Alice Weidel.
Für einen Neuanfang.
Now is the time for a new beginning. While the AfD has doubled its popularity since the last election, it's expected to come second, but barred from joining the next governing coalition.
All the opinion polls suggest that the centre-right Christian Democrats, the CDU, will win the election and lead Germany's next government. They've accused the outgoing left-leaning coalition of being soft on immigration. The CDU is promising to restore law and order and make the country safe again.
Unless there's a major upset, Germany's next chancellor will be Friedrich Merz, a pro-business lawyer. During a debate with Social Democrat rival Olaf Scholz, Merz warned of the consequences of failing to tackle migration and Germany's flagging economy.
Then we will finally slide into right-wing populism, and I am standing here to avoid exactly that. I will only sign a coalition agreement that includes a turnaround on migration and a turnaround on the economy.
Scholz, the outgoing chancellor, also signaled his willingness to get tough on immigration.
Perpetrators must be severely punished, and if they've committed such offenses and do not have German citizenship, then they must certainly expect that we will return them to their country of origin.
Despite its popular support, the AfD is regarded as beyond the pale by all the mainstream parties, and they've agreed a so-called firewall to keep the far right out of office. But can Merz create a stable coalition government without the support of the AfD? Catherine Kluwer-Ashbrook is a German-American political scientist.
If that coalition holds, is strong enough in terms of its majority, then he can absolutely push out and sideline the AfD. Now, is that majority going to be stable enough for the AfD to not hit the coalition with a lot of obstructionism and make their life very hard? Those are what the numbers on Sunday will show. Right now, those numbers are very, very tight.
Helped controversially by Elon Musk, who declared his support for the AfD when he interviewed Alice Weidel on X.
Only AfD can save Germany. End of story. Yes, because you rightly said there is a difference of making a law and then enforcing it.
Then Vice President J.D. Vance entered the fray at the Munich Security Conference.
What German democracy, what no democracy, American, German, or European, will survive is telling millions of voters that their thoughts and concerns, their aspirations, their pleas for relief are invalid or unworthy of even being considered.
Vance's intervention played well in Magdeburg.
Wir wollen gehört werden. Wir werden aber nicht gehört.
We want to be heard, but we're not being listened to. The politicians up there do whatever they want. They lie to us and serve only themselves instead of serving the people.
Drücke ich so aus. Sie nennen sich Demokraten.
They call themselves Democrats, but behave in a way that is far from democratic in my eyes, especially because they always refer to German history. This exclusion and marginalization, we've seen that before, and it must never happen again to anyone, not even to the AfD.
Auch nicht mit der AfD.
But there was outrage elsewhere.
We respect the presidential elections and the congressional elections in the US, and we expect the US to do the same here.
Whether it's the defense minister or the chancellor or the president, but also average people feel highly offended by the fact that somebody would attempt to officially meddle in the way that they perceive the functionality of their democracy.
But the AfD's deputy leader, Beatrix von Storck, couldn't be happier.
How important is the endorsement of the United States Vice President?
I don't think that this shifts the numbers, but it shows to our enemies that they maybe should be a bit careful. And that we have got strong allies, we have got strong connections towards the United States and towards Russia.
Show me what democracy looks like!
In recent weeks, there have been large protests against Germany's lean to the right. Actor and musician Herbert Grönemeyer.
Unsere Demokratie wird heftig angegriffen.
Our democracy is under fierce attack, be it from smear campaigns, disinformation, fake news, trolls, or from enemies of democracy in the parties and in the media, who do not just want to jeopardize our peaceful liberal coexistence, but destroy it.
Nicht gefährden wollen, sondern zersetzen.
Growing anti-immigrant sentiment worries 27-year-old Syrian refugee Ihab Sukaria, who fled Damascus 10 years ago to avoid being drafted.
So I have temporary status here in Germany, and once the war is ended, which is now ended, I might be sent back to Syria anytime.
Sukaria was one of a million Syrians who followed the migrant trail to Germany nearly 10 years ago, when the then Chancellor, Angela Merkel, threw open the borders. A fluent German speaker, and he says fully integrated, Sukaria is currently unemployed and desperately looking for work to try to secure his future.
I'm very scared to go back to Syria because Berlin is definitely my home. And I love it here. I feel comfortable, I feel accepted, and I blend in.
But German tolerance is no longer guaranteed as this landmark election approaches, with an agenda driven by the buoyant AfD, supported by an unpredictable American administration.
There's a trust chasm right now between the two sides of the Atlantic that is as deep as it ever was in the history of this relationship over 80 years.
Come Sunday, victory may taste sweet, but given the current climate, it could ultimately be a poisoned chalice. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Malcolm Brabant in Berlin.
When Sunni rebels toppled the regime of Bashar al-Assad last December, they vowed to form an inclusive government by March. As that deadline inches closer, there's growing pressure to make good on that promise. Sunnis comprise around 75% of Syrians, with the remaining 25% made up of minorities like the Alawites, Christians, Shiite Muslims, Kurds, and the Druze. Special correspondent Simona Foltin met with members of some of these communities and has this report from Damascus.
On the outskirts of Damascus lies one of the holiest sites of Shia Islam. This shrine is said to be the burial site of Prophet Muhammad's granddaughter, Zainab. On a normal day, it's bustling with Shiite pilgrims and worshippers. When the Sunni opposition toppled Bashar al-Assad's government in December, some of Syria's tiny Shiite minority feared that they and their places of worship would come under attack. Sheikh Akram Mustafa was here when the rebels took over.
When they advanced on Damascus, there was chaos, and some people, through their individual behavior, threatened some of the sects. So fear followed.
A video circulated of armed Sunni fighters attempting to storm the shrine, spreading panic and prompting some Shia to flee to neighboring Lebanon.
We didn't know what their agenda was, what their direction and thinking would be. Really, people were afraid.
Syria's new president, Ahmed al-Shara, has since made reassuring statements.
We are working on protecting sects and minorities from any attacks. Syria is a country for all, and we can coexist together, and we have a close relationship with all segments of Syrian society.
An uneasy calm has settled over the shrine, but visitors remained few and far between. Stability appears to have returned, at least for now, but there is an overall question about the role minorities like the Shia will play in the future of Syria. Religious leaders like Sheikh Akram hope for an end to sectarian strife.
God willing, it's in anyone's interest to sabotage this country. Syria's ethno-religious groups should extend their hands to each other, rebuild and live in peace so that this country can return to the way we were before.
That the way things were before is a controversial topic. During the war, this area saw an influx in Shiite inhabitants. The Sunni fighters who are now in charge think it's only right that these demographic changes be reversed.
The original inhabitants of this area are Sunni, though there were some people from the Shia sect. The Iranian government and the regime of the criminal Bashar al-Assad worked on igniting sectarian flames. They brought Shia from other countries who came to our area to kill our people.
Abu Bakr is the military commander responsible for the area. He denied that Shiite civilians have fled in the wake of the rebels' arrival.
Some people have fled the area because they are war criminals, whereas the people who did not bear weapons are here, and we are living together with them, and the situation is excellent.
The shrine used to be guarded by the Shiite paramilitary group Hezbollah, which came to Syria in 2012 to fight alongside Bashar al-Assad's government. For local Sunnis, Hezbollah was not the shrine's protector, but an invading force. Now, the checkpoint Hezbollah manned together with Syrian and Iranian troops stands deserted. Posters of its late leader, Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah, have been torn down. Meanwhile, local Sunni men have joined the rebel army to fill the security vacuum.
I joined to protect the area until stability returns, God willing.
The fighter says that these forces are here to protect all Syrians, Sunni or Shia.
There are rumors that we are killing Shia. It's all lies. We are not encroaching on them. We are one hand. The only thing we did is to finish the criminal regime.
With Assad's overthrow, Syria is under Sunni majority rule, the very scenario Assad portrayed as an existential threat to garner support among his own minority sect, the Alawites. They're an offshoot of Shia Islam and comprise about 10% of the country's population. Many Alawites who joined Assad's security forces did so for the sake of survival rather than fierce loyalty. They got little in return. In this dilapidated Alawite neighborhood of Damascus, I sat down with a group of young men who were happy to see Assad gone.
Many people misunderstood this matter. That's because we were from the same sect as the former president. This area was better off. We lived in great poverty.
Under Assad's rule, they could barely scrape a living, nowhere near enough to own a car, buy a house, or get married.
We lived from day to day, from hour to hour that you can get work so you can eat.
Poverty left many Alawites with little choice but to join the army.
The options for the Alawites were known. It was the army. They didn't give us opportunities to study or become anything else. The instructions were that this sect should go to the army.
The Alawites' disproportionate share in the security forces has sparked calls for revenge.
Who do you want to take revenge on? The people who lived in poverty, who had nothing to do with anything? The revenge shouldn't be against a specific sect. The army included Sunnis, Alawites, Druze. All of them were involved in hurting the Syrian people.
The new government has offered a general amnesty to soldiers who weren't implicated in crimes and has promised to protect minorities, including the Alawites. But ensuring the protection of minorities isn't quite the same as granting them equal rights. In the Christian neighborhood of Bab Tuma, some worry that Christians could be relegated to second-class citizens. Rimon Saloum is a member of the Syriac Orthodox Church.
We aspire to be equal in our rights and our duties. We will not accept for the media or the new government to refer to us as minorities.
In a bid to bridge the divide, Shara recently met with church leaders, but there's skepticism that these gatherings are more show than substance. In the meantime, the transitional government has made unilateral decisions on vital issues. The school curriculum has been revised from a largely secular to a more Islamic one, raising worries that planned amendments to the constitution will also take on an Islamic slant. Christians and other segments of Syrian society are sounding the alarm over not being included.
We want to play a greater role in the political process. We want to have a clear role and voice in building modern Syria. We want to start working on the constitution, which should be done in cooperation of all the sects in Syrian society and not limited to just one group.
On the face of it, Syria's new rulers have said the right things. But to earn the trust of Syria's people, including its many minorities, actions must follow suit. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Simona Faltin in Damascus, Syria.
From fresh tensions between the U.S. and Ukraine to town hall backlash to major cuts to the federal workforce, we turn now to the analysis of Brooks and Capehart. That's New York Times columnist David Brooks and Jonathan Capehart, associate editor for The Washington Post. It's great to have you here, as always. So let's start with Ukraine. No one expected Donald Trump to handle global affairs like his predecessors, but he has fully adopted Russia's false propaganda on Ukraine, calling Zelensky a dictator, falsely stating that it was Ukraine that started the war, rhetorically turning against a democracy that was invaded in favor of the invader. What are the implications, Dave?
Yeah, it's pretty revolutionary. I mean, I think first you can say goodbye to NATO. NATO is really built around Article 5, the promise we make to each other that we will defend each other. And I don't think Trump is going to defend anybody else. But I think the bigger story is a shift in values. That American foreign policy and Western foreign policy has been built around democracy promotion, human dignity, human rights. And so we banded together to sort of promote those causes. Donald Trump doesn't see that world that way. He sees the world as a place where ruthless mafiosos get to do what they can. There's a famous line from the Peloponnesian Wars, the strong do what they can, the weak suffer what they must. And so I think in Donald Trump's world, there are three ruthless mafioso countries. Russia will have hegemony over its region. We will have hegemony over our region, and China will have hegemony over their region. And so anything that gets in the way of ruthless mafioso is being eliminated. And some of that is international alliances, but some of this is just the idea that you shouldn't interfere in other people's elections, and some of it is the idea that you shouldn't be able to invade neighboring countries. And so all those rules are being rewritten by somebody who wants to turn all of global affairs into survival of the fittest.
What about that? Are we on the precipice of the end of the alliance as we know it?
There's nothing David said that I disagree with. The language that we heard from Donald Trump in the first term was already alarming. I'm thinking specifically of the Helsinki press conference, which I think it was in 2017, where he said that Vladimir Putin, he told me he didn't do anything to our elections. I don't see any reason, not to believe him. Now he's ratcheted that up with calling Zelensky a dictator. If you are the leader of a Baltic nation, if you are the leader of Poland, if you're the leader of Germany, France, you must be scared out of your mind about what this means, the rhetoric about Ukraine means for Europe. And if you are in Taiwan, you better be prepared for what China could do.
What about this idea, and I've heard this from some Trump allies, that it's high time we had an American leader who acted in such a way that effectively forces Europe to take control of their own security, that you could point to Dwight Eisenhower back in the 1950s, who raised concerns about Europe's sort of lackadaisical approach to their own security.
Yeah, that's a valid point. I mean, they haven't been paying, as long as the Cold War was going on, they didn't have to pay their dues. And so now they have to because the Cold War is over. So that arrangement was bound to end. But they have upped their spending. The amount of spending that Donald Trump wants Europe to pay as a percentage of GDP, we don't even do that. So it's an act of hypocrisy to say they're totally at the wrong. They're somewhat at the wrong. But that's really not what the core is here. Look at what Donald Trump has been doing to Ukraine over the last week. He sends the Treasury Secretary in there, and he hands him a piece of paper, said, basically hand us over 50% of your mineral rights. That is, I'm making you an offer you can't refuse. Mm-hmm. That is what, in ancient Rome, they would go into a little country and say, give us all your money or we'll kill your women. Like that was like an imperial power saying, tribute, give us tribute. That's essentially what Donald Trump just did to Vladimir Putin. And initially, Putin said, hell no. But now it could be an offer he can't refuse because he needs the Americans. And so now they're, I guess, coming close to a deal because we're taking a country that was invaded, that bravely resisted on the behalf of the Western Alliance. We're saying pay up. And it's, I don't have words to describe.
And I just want to jump in on something David was saying about, defense expenditures. The way Donald Trump talks about it, he says these countries are ripping us off as if they're paying the United States money in a protection racket. And that's not what's happening at all. To amplify David's point, is just spend more of your GDP on your own defense, rise up to the level of where the United States is, relatively speaking, so that the burden is more fairly shared. And so the way the president talks about it, it's not the real world. And yet, to your point, where people say, well, maybe we should start caring about America, those folks, I don't think, fully understand what a peaceful world, what the NATO alliance, what American leadership on the global stage has meant for their own peace and prosperity here at home.
Well, meantime, President Trump's poll numbers appear to be falling. New polls from CNN and the Washington Post show a majority of Americans say he's overstepped his presidential authority and hasn't done enough to address high prices. David, when you look at these numbers more closely, what do you see?
Well, people don't like chaos. I mean, we saw that when Biden withdrew from Afghanistan. People just don't like chaos. And second, people do rely on government, like Postal Service, SNAP benefits, go to the National Park Service, try to get a passport renewed. Like, if there's nobody in the office, you're gonna be upset. Finally, I think the big thing is the inflation. That inflation is begun to tick up again. If we have tariffs, it'll tick up more. If we pass a $4 trillion unpaid for tax cut, we will overstimulate the economy. Inflation will tick up more. And so the very thing that took down the Biden administration could, in turn, take down the Trump administration if inflation kicks up after his explicit promise, I'm going to bring it down. He swore to us that interest rates would go down immediately when he was elected, and the reverse has happened.
Well, this seems to have come to a head last night. Georgia Republican Congressman Rich McCormick held a town hall, and he faced an angry crowd, and the folks there, his constituents, were upset over the steep cuts to the federal workforce that had been instituted by Elon Musk and his Doge aides. Take a listen.
I would like to know, rather, the people would like to know what you, congressmen, and your fellow congressmen are going to do to rein in the megalomaniac in the White House.
When you talk about tyranny, when you talk about presidential power, I remember having the same discussion with Republicans when Biden was elected.
So this is a deep red district. Donald Trump won this district by more than 20 points. I mean, what do you see happening here, Jonathan?
To me, it's you have people in a district who voted, as you said, deep Republican district, but they didn't vote for Elon Musk. They didn't vote for the chaos. They don't like the fact that someone who is unelected and unaccountable is wreaking havoc on the federal government. But more importantly, the congressman is from a co-equal branch of government. The woman who was asking the question, like, what are you going to do? You are Congress. Why aren't you stepping in to push back against the president? And what we saw there is that they're not willing. I mean, you can't have guardrails if the guardrail doesn't want to guard, if Congress doesn't want to step in.
And you wrote about this this past week in a column where you said that it's the working class communities that will continue to languish because Trump ignores their main challenges and focuses instead on cultural culture war distractions. That people who voted for change want to see that change.
Yeah, the people who voted for Trump had good reason to. Like, high school educated people die 8 years sooner than college educated people. High school educated people, their kids by 6th grade are 4 grade levels below college educated people. They're much more likely to say they're lonely. They're much more likely to live in devastated communities without social capital. So if you had a populist government, they would have policies to address these serious issues. The Trump administration is not leading with that. They really don't have plans for any of this. And when you look at who's in the administration, it's obvious why. The president and Elon Musk are University of Pennsylvania graduates who are billionaires. Pete Hegseth went to Princeton and Yale. J.D. Vance went to Yale. Stephen Miller went to Duke. These are the highly educated right-wingers. And I've been around all these people all my life. I used to be one. And there are two types. There are one people who believe in conservative governance, and then there's the other type. They're just anti-left. They don't have a positive vision for conservative governments. They want to tear down the institutions that they believe the left controls. And so that's what they're doing. That's what Trump goes after. He goes after USAID. He goes after the Forest Service. He goes after the Department of Education. And so it's all tearing down institutions that they believe the left controls. And the problem with that is that the pain is borne by the woman in Namibia who's going to die of AIDS, the kid in Ohio who's going to die of cancer because NIH medical research has been gutted. And so it's you know, F. Scott Fitzgerald put it well, rich people are careless. They break things. And I think that's what's happening here.
The other thing that was clear in that town hall last night is that it's one thing to campaign against a faceless bureaucracy. It's very different when people's friends and neighbors start to lose their jobs with little to no warning, and veterans, too, who are losing their jobs. How do you see it?
There's that, but there's also, let's not forget the funding freeze, that you've got farmers who were depending on funding coming from the federal government. They took out loans to buy equipment, to get their products from the farm, some are sitting in silos, rotting. They were due to go overseas to feed people as part of USAID. This isn't just faceless bureaucrats being fired here in Washington, and I think that is the chaos that people are seeing. Wait, what? The federal government just isn't in Washington? It's my neighbor. It's the clinic down the street where my child is getting treatment. That I don't think we are just 1 month in to this administration, and we have yet to see just how damaging this 1 month has been. There's still more time to go.
Indeed. Jonathan Capehart, David Brooks, thank you both.
Thanks.
Thank you.
A once valuable resource for Black travelers is now the subject of an exhibit in Washington, D.C. NewsHour Communities correspondent Gabrielle Hayes has the story, part of our ongoing series, Race Matters.
Those were all in the Green Book.
The Negro Motorist Green Book, a guide for African Americans first published in 1936, was a valued resource at a time when travel held the promise of adventure, but was also perilous. It is now the subject of an exhibit here at the Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial Library in Washington, D.C. Candace Taylor, who wrote Overground Railroad, The Green Book and the Roots of Black Travel in America, helped pull the exhibit together with the Smithsonian Institution Traveling Exhibition Service and the D.C. Public Library System. The exhibit tells the history of the guide, named after its creators, Victor Hugo Green and his wife, Alma.
We wanted to show people who were living their best lives in spite of what was happening around them.
It served as a catalog of hotels, restaurants, and other businesses that would serve Black people when racial segregation was legal. It was published annually until 1967. At the exhibit center, a compass.
It helps kind of orient you in this place because, again, it wasn't just the South that had racism. Jim Crow had no borders.
Sundown towns, communities that excluded non-white residents by law, intimidation, or violence after dark, were especially dangerous.
For Black Americans who used it, going the wrong direction could mean life or death.
Some sundown towns had a bell that would ring at 6 o'clock. telling the local laborers who were black and the domestic workers that was their cue to get out of town. The consequences of you being in a sundown town were everything from harassment to death, to lynchings. There were no sundown town maps, so for travelers, you wouldn't know where the minefields were.
Taylor, a photographer and cultural documentarian, spent years researching sites in the guide, driving more than 110,000 miles and photographing nearly 300 sites in 48 states.
This guide was a license to leave. It was a way for people to find sanctuary and safety on the road.
Some of what she found surprised her, including hundreds of women-owned businesses, from hair salons to boarding houses.
We're talking about periods where women couldn't even have bank accounts on their own, but we're seeing them listed in this book, and that seems pretty powerful.
I thought I knew a lot about Black history, and I came across all these women-owned businesses in the Green Book, and there were things called tourist homes, which were kind of like not quite boarding houses. Most of these tourist homes were run by widowed women who had an extra bedroom and knew how to cook. And then when I dug deeper and found the personalities of these women and interviewed some of the relatives of these women, they were fierce and they were not just independent. I mean, they had real courage and skills in how to survive.
Through her research, Taylor found some family history, remembered by her stepfather, Ron Burford.
But yeah, now we're in front of Ron's quote in a chauffeur's hat here. And he says, everybody had one and you always kept it in the car.
It was safer to claim to be working for a white family than to be driving your own family anywhere.
You know, when the sheriff was walking towards to the passenger door, his father turned around and said, shh, he's like, don't say anything. And the sheriff, you know, says, you know, where are you going? Whose car is this? And who are these people with you? And his father said, this is my employer's car. He looked at his wife and pretended he didn't know her and said, this is the maid, and that's her son in the back, and I'm driving them home. And the police officer said, you know, well, where's your hat? His father said, it's hanging in the back, officer. And Ron looked, and there was a chauffeur's hat hanging there, and it had always been there.
Sharing his stories brought them closer.
And it was almost as though when I did this project, he could trust me with his trauma. And it really gave me a different perspective and a lens to look at not only our history as Black people, but as his particular history as a dark-skinned Black man growing up in the South.
Even though the days of the Green Book are long past, Taylor says the struggle for justice is far from over.
The idea that just because time moves on, that we get better as a country is not true. When people say, oh, it's 2025, why are we still dealing with this? Or how could this be happening now? And when you learn about history, you'll see that things don't just march forward.
But she points to what Victor Green accomplished.
It doesn't take a lot to make change. He did this simple thing. He was postal worker. He didn't have up to an 8th grade education. He had no resources. There were no computers. There was no internet. And all of this happened with an idea. So you don't need to be rich. You don't need a business degree. You don't need all this stuff to make change.
The exhibit is on display through March 2nd and also online. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Gabrielle Hayes in Washington.
Remember, there's always a lot more online, including our digital weekly show. This week, we go behind the scenes with some of this year's top Oscar contenders. That is on our YouTube page.
And be sure to watch Washington Week with The Atlantic later this evening here on PBS. Moderator Jeffrey Goldberg and his panel discuss President Trump's pivot towards Russia and America's role in the world.
And on PBS News Weekend, we examine which parts of the Project 2025 blueprint the Trump administration is already implementing and what that could mean for the country. And that is the NewsHour for tonight. I'm Amna Nawaz.
And I'm Jeff Bennett. For all of us here at the PBS NewsHour, thanks for spending part of your evening with us. Have a great weekend.
Major funding for the PBS NewsHour has been provided by the ongoing support of these individuals and institutions, and friends of the NewsHour, including Kathy and Paul Anderson, and Camilla and George Smith. The Walton Family Foundation, working for solutions to protect water during climate change so people and nature can thrive together. The William and Flora Hewlett Foundation, for more than 50 years advancing ideas and supporting institutions to promote a better world, at hewlett.org.
It really matters when you have an opportunity to give back.
Being part of something that's bigger than myself, that's what brings me happiness.
Being able to integrate your professional career with some of these other things that are important to you, it's critical to be happy at the end of the day.
You know, this is our community too, and we want to participate and give back to it.
People want those opportunities to make an impact and a difference.
And with the ongoing support of these individuals and institutions. And friends of the NewsHour. This program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
You're watching PBS.